All right, just making sure. All right, can you hear me okay? I can use this thing here. All right, hi everybody. My name is Collin. I will talk a little bit about, actually quite a lot. I hope not too much. I have a lot of content here. I realize that it might be too much for the 30 minutes roughly that I slotted in here, but I might browse over a few things and then later on you can take a look at the text. But we're going to talk about Merge Friends Postmortem. Right now I'm working as, does this work? Yes. Right now I'm a game lead at Papukaya, which is a Supercell backed small startup founded about 2 years ago to look at the underserved audiences, casual gamers who don't identify as gamers. I worked at Skunkworks, which is the whole talk about, co-founded that with a group of Oli, for example, here. Hello, Oli. Yeah, I'm going to call you out, that's right. There's some others here there as well. Karida has worked there, so just name dropping. Yeah, and but I got my start at Digital Chocolate, working in free-to-play games, and I've been around for 10 years doing a variety of design and product roles. Yeah, and now I'm doing game lead, and we're early stage, still looking at the market, figuring out what to do next. This is not responding. Do I have to do this? Okay. A few things. So this postmortem is a design and product perspective, so I'm not going to go too much into other aspects, how for example, the culture or maybe some of the stuff like financial stuff will necessarily be talked about because it relates to a free-to-play game and how a free-to-play game is developed. But yeah, I'm mainly looking at it from that perspective and somewhat trying to ignore the other challenges that were with the company. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to talk about those like separately, because we have for example, we did a postmortem of the company, and we've actually really did a lot of thought about what are the things that we didn't do correctly there. The other thing is this doesn't really respond. That's yeah, and my hope is that you can take some nuggets, these design things, and we'll learn from them, because that's the whole point. So there were some failures, there were things that we didn't do right, and I just take those, and I hope that you will then take those to the next project. And lastly, this is very text heavy, so there are actually two reasons. So one is that I want this to be like a document that people then can share, and they don't have to link to a video, that you can just go back and say, oh, hey, let's see, here are some of the stats. The other very more selfish reason is that, yeah, I'm slightly lazy. I didn't want to do all the presentation stuff, so I made it all in the text heavy, so that way. I'm being very honest. I have a kid, so the whole life as a father is a new thing for me, and lack of sleep is a real problem, so bear with me. Why is all this important? Why are you here? Why am I presenting this? And why do I think you should know more about Merge Friends and the life and the death of Merge Friends? Actually, very first thing, this does not work. Do I really have to do this? Okay. I like it over here. Maybe I'll go over here. So this is actually a textbook example of, I think, what a lot of us are already going through, which is the issues with like following in the gaming industry getting more competitive, and let's say there's a new game that comes out and you're super excited about it, that genre, you can think you can make a game for that, and you fast follow. That's exactly what we did. There's another presentation which I gave, what was that, August? I can't remember. That was 2021. 2021 in the summertime. Joachim's Elite Game Developers, and I talked a lot about how fast it was for us to develop the game. It took us 8 weeks, roughly 2 months, to get the game from. Actually, I'll go into it more in detail. But yeah, it was really fast. But unfortunately, we weren't able to capture that. So it gives an idea of what not to do in some ways. You take a lot of short-term make a lot of short-term decisions in order to get the game out fast. But then, unfortunately, if you're not thinking long-term, it can come back to bite you in the butt. Then I think this is what I was mentioning, was that the capital markets, for example, are tightening up, and then all of this is in this post IDFA landscape of UA and how competitive it is now, and how ridiculously high some of the CPIs are. And this is exactly what we felt. We felt that the CPIs were so high, and for us to compete with all the other big games, it became a really big issue. And then when we started to look for funding to sort of support the game and grow the game, it became really difficult because, yeah, there was a lack of interest in investing in companies that weren't profit focused. It used to be growth, but now it was focused on profit, and so that was an issue. And then, yeah, it was a modest startup success story. So we actually had a point where we were living pretty much paycheck to paycheck, very small paychecks, and we were close to not just shuttering down. But then we managed to sneak in with this lifeline with Merge Friends. We got overall 5.6 million lifetime funding, and the game itself raised roughly about 4.5 million, give or take. And yeah, it's sometimes you get a game that's out there and or you get a company and then it flops like right away. Like you're not able to make any game possible or any success. But at least this is a way that we at least got somewhere, modest success. And then lastly is just an example, and I think this is what a main takeaway is to look at the strategy of Merge Mansion, for example, and there are some really good examples of opportunities that are available for a company that is really ambitious, looking for something that would change the industry. And I think this is an opportunity for you to look into if you're a game development studio. So I'm going to assume, like Ari, that you already know a lot about Merge games. But what you probably haven't seen is a really good breakdown of all the releases of Merge games. So I'm going to give you a snapshot just to show you how it's played over time. I won't go into pre-Merge Dragons because there are like a whole bunch of Merge games there, but they're not really relevant in this conversation, just because the game economies are so different. So they tend to be a bit more casual experiences. But yeah, if you want more, you can check out the presentation. So, I don't get this. I feel like it's one of those moments that I need to be smarter than okay. Maybe I just need to stand here. So yeah, here's the overall life timeline of Merge games. And then on the bottom row, you can see these are the amount of games in the genre. So this includes both Merge 3 and then Merge 2 games. So the very first one is Merge Dragons, which I assume all of you know really well. But it wasn't until, so that's the blue line that you see up at the top. It wasn't actually until about 2.5 years later, which the same company, Gram Games, came out with Merge Magic. And it actually wasn't, it took a really long time. And if you played that game, you probably understand why, because it's an insane beast of a game to first create all the art for it, but also just to manage the whole board. And they also have a collection mechanic in that, which is, it is very difficult. And I can see it as a big hurdle for gaming studios to enter into this one. And then we have EverMerge, which kind of had a slight twist on the Merge genre. So it didn't have the dragon mechanic. So anyway, I won't go too deep in this. I would love to talk like specifically about all the mechanics, but I'm not going to do that because it's so fun. But I won't. And then we have Merge Gardens, and which kind of it took something from Merge Dragons, which was the level-based progression. And it turned it into Match 3, and then you have a Match 3 game, and then you also have the Merge board. And then in comes Merge Mansion. And it's actually very interesting how many people got excited about this. There's so many companies, and I remember thinking at this time, like, this is a gold rush. It was like, wow, this is an amazing game mechanic, and it's actually quite easy to create a game for this. There are a number of reasons. The fact that you have a single board, and yeah, you're only merging 2 items, and yeah, there are some things with the production that I think make it a lot easier. There are a whole slew of games came out. Merge Friends, for example, came out with. There's Love and Pies. There's Travel Town, Mergedom, Merge Villa, Merge Inn, and then the last one was Sunny Vale, Merge Manor, and then Love and Pies, as I mentioned. And then there's also some other newcomers that came. Anyways, there's a lot of games that are now out there. So it's no longer the blue ocean that it once was. So if you're thinking now, oh, I'm going to make a merge game, probably need to think a little bit more. Actually, I have some thoughts about that at the end. So that gives you a recap. As you can see, it got really, really competitive really fast for us. So now we go into the actual learnings. This was actually just the preamble, so I should probably speed this thing up. Yes, so what went well? This thing, is it the battery, or am I just technically not inclined? So what I mentioned earlier, scrappy design and development, it took us 8 weeks to develop Merge Friends. We were working on a game called Emma's Kitchen, and then we delivered Merge Friends really quickly. Had the idea, it was like, we had an Excel sheet, I think, that we were talking about with me and Oli. Oli was the other counterpart designer. We worked together along with another programmer to develop the game. And this was the actual retention. I managed to save this from a screenshot directly from Facebook Analytics. You can see the second column there is the day 1 retention. There's 78, 70, 72, 80%, and these are 200, 100-day user per day cohorts. So when it was quite shocking, needless to say, that when you put a game out there and you get this kind of thing, you're like, what the heck? This must be a mistake. So we obviously reran it. It wasn't a mistake. And we knew we had something. And so when we went to investors, it was obviously easy sell in order to get funding because we had a hit on our hands. And this is just like a look back at the development. So this is like some of the first. There you can see the board here where it looks really ugly. I remember the cheeses. Some inside jokes here. And then this was the board, a single board, and then we had this task, some early concepts of what it would look like. And then this was the MVP, and actually it looks really, really super ugly. If I do say so myself, it looks like quite bad, but this was the game that we end up launching and got this retention because the core mechanic is so sticky. So what went well? So there were some key design decisions. First one was the theme and premise. So we chose a theme that we felt, okay, it wasn't out there yet, and there are plenty of other games, successful games in the market that have that theme. So this is the city building theme. And yeah, the idea was to create something, a cohesive experience. We had the early first-time user flow, and then item design, so focusing on usability. And then the last one is the daily tasks, and I'll go into each of these now. I think this battery is broken. Okay, so here's the core loop. You merge stuff to complete tasks, and you spawn more items. So that's like the main goal. You as Ari alluded to, is that the intrinsic motivation, the desire to see new items and how they are, how the rest of the game will expand. That's kind of the main motivation. The completing the tasks actually wasn't a major thing. We didn't have very much visual progression, but the one thing that we did have was the early visual progression. And you can see that there's a small GIF. Can't see all the details, but you slowly rebuild the shop. So the idea was to create context and meaning. So you are basically taking these items, and this is what the benefit I think of merge and casual merge is that the items that you were actually creating in the core gameplay are used directly in the metagame in this kind of like a longer progression. In the casual games, you have this like you get stars, which then fix things up. In this one, you're actually like you're getting the items which you can use directly. And then just for progression, they all need to be like level up so that they feel that they're an evolution of the previous one, because it feels lame if you get a glove and then the glove turns into something that's not as cool or more complex. So we start with something simple, and then visually and both thematically and more rare, I think also, like, is it something that in the player's mind do they think about all the time? So those are some of the areas. And then we need to depace all of this thing. So for example, board space, we had tightly controlled by unlock, so we don't want the board to expand too much where there's too many items for the players to manage. So we actually had these XP zones that you open up that we just borrowed from all the other games, how you unlock a space. This helped to create a more compact experience and give players less to kind of control, so that they're not overwhelmed with how many options there are on the board. The new creators we unlocked through the board. So when they were, we tried to cut, like this one, for example, the cleaning and the tools. It didn't spawn anything new. Like it was these were the items that came at the cleaning chain, the tools chain. They didn't have anything else. It was basically the point here was to lock the creators so that new items wouldn't come out. And then the new item chains, they come from the creators. So the new creators come from when you unlock board spaces, and then the item chains come from those creators. And then last one is the item chains, item chests, which come from the XP. So we gate those by locking those later. But yeah, so the main point here is that we did a really good job of kind of controlling the experience. We actually did quite a lot of iterations of this. Ole will attest to how many times he went through the first time user experience and getting this right. So yeah, then we had the meaningful merge, what I mentioned. So we try to create the context for a merge game. So we had the initial setup. What you see here is that you're rebuilding the store. Then we create the characters that live in the town that you're serving, and then you deliver them goods. So it's creating the overall premise, the setup of the game. And then finally you have the overall town where you can see all the progression. You can see all the characters in their town. There's a lot of things that we could have done more with the town screen, but this is where it was at. All right. And then this is something that we, like, I think me and Oli, we obviously are biased for this, but this is something that I think we did really well, was just tying the usability of the item. So you can see cleaning and tools, they come from the toolbox. And then you have the shopping. You know exactly what's coming out of these. There's clothes already. Okay, there's pets. There's other things that I can buy. And then there's the veggies that come from the grocery cart. And the whole idea here was that, for example, when a player returns to the game, which Leska, you mentioned, when a player returns to the game, they can see the creators and they know exactly where they're coming from. Because I think for a lot of players, if you're returning to the game after 2 or 3 days, you might forget actually, hey, where did these items come from? And then especially if multiples of these, if you only have 3, that's pretty manageable. But then if you have 6 or 7 different types of creators at any one time, it can be quite difficult. And then you start to get into the events, or then if you get later in the game and you run out of things to try to figure out, like, okay, what's another creator, you might find there's one like kind of similar that maybe might have the same functionality, and then that's where it starts to get really tricky. But yeah, we prided ourselves on this, and I think the main idea here was just to make it super easy for players to complete tasks. And then the daily task is the last one. So this is something that was actually one of the first features that we released. We had basically the idea is that you have a task chain that at the end of the task chain, you will get a reward. So this is a chest, and the chest is something that we didn't really tell what the player to the player what it was. We ended up using it as a tool to give more currencies, more advanced currencies, and then also tied into the seasonal content. Yeah, and one of the things is that each day of the week had the same tasks. So that on Monday you had the same items that are needed. So we did some studies from the 12 traits, and we saw, so 12 traits is a user psychological profile company, and we use that information. The players really like to be prepared. So we took that, hey, let's create a feature which allows us to then tap into that. And players can then prepare in advance on Monday, for example, to complete these tasks. Yeah, and then it allowed us to have a semblance of live ops. Even where this was like probably, so this was December roughly 2020. So very early on, early stages. And then, yeah, the tasks were eventually reskinned, so we're able to like quite quickly create something from, for example, we had like, there's a beach task, for example, daily task. Then we would, during the beach time, for the summertime, we would change these all into beach reskin. All right. And then I actually had a feature idea, which we tossed around quite a few ideas about this, which was like daily task streak feature. So then you try to keep your streak alive, and then you get bonuses and like that's more just a little nugget for anyone who's interested. So yeah, now all of the positives. Now I'll go into the negatives. We're doing well. Yeah, so I think one thing that I'll really point out here is the lack of long-term progression. So you saw that there was, we mentioned that there was a really good first-time user experience, but we didn't really have anything other than that initial first visual progression for the players to do. We didn't have other than, of course, the visual progression from the items themselves, right? The item chains are obviously something in themselves, but that was the main issue for the long-term progression. We could have borrowed from existing, and I think this is something that, like in retrospect, seems kind of like obvious. But then, when you think about where we were, and also maybe the team and the experience level, it would have been quite a big undertaking for us as a small studio to build out the pipelines in order to create the content for this. For example, if you've played this is Royal Match. There is another gaming company, Merge Game, who did something similar. That's something that I probably would, in retrospect, taken a look at. But there were no guarantees. This also has a lot of cons, for example, which we talked with Ari about, that, for example, you don't see all of the visual progression here, so it's only a snapshot. You get to see the whole place build out, but then it goes away, and then you move on to the next one. So it has some negative sides as well. Then live ops, I think this is something that I also mentioned in some ways, that we went into live ops, I would say, too early. I know this sounds maybe slightly counterintuitive, but if you don't have the foundational systems in place, for example, we didn't have the design of like how we're actually going to live ops, what is the content, which I'm going to mention. So this is called what, in my mind, is a variant. So you have something in the game, and then it might have some variant, whether that's numbers. So like say you have an item and it has some stats, or then it's visuals. So then it's a variant. We didn't really know what our variants in the game. We had some different ideas about the items, like, and the item chains could be variants. So you maybe have an event, and then one of the existing item chains turns into something else, and then for that period of time. Like that was one idea how we had thought about. There wasn't, one thing is that there wasn't really clear precedence for this in the Merge 2 space, so there wasn't too much, well, actually there were no games, when we were working on this, there were no games running actually live ops, so this was something that we had to kind of like design as we were going. And then one obvious tool I think in retrospect we misused was the second board. So in Merge Friends, you have one board which you start off with, but at level 20, you can open up another board. And that's like, what is it? It's like 2 weeks? How many? It's like, yeah, a week or two, yeah, roughly, into the game. We could have taken that that second board and then repurposed it for a seasonal board. So it could have been just used, hey, this is something that as a new content comes in here. Also has its negatives, but I think the second board has a whole slew of challenges of moving items back and forth, not to mention even more board space that the player has to use, and they're not seeing which board is, they have one board and then they have another board anyways. Yes. And then lastly, yeah, it wasn't really until the end we started to get a flow. I wasn't really in the project at that towards the end, but there was some really good stuff by IGDA, for example, putting some really cool rhythm with the events at the end, tying some of the high-end level items, turning those into spawners, so it encouraged players to merge those to the end. Yeah, had a good impact. This is all right, and then I think this is something that I alluded to is in the LinkedIn post. We had a lack of timely monetization focused features, and also the clans feature, which we ended up working on. Or we couldn't see the impact through. By the time that the feature actually came out, it was already too late. And yeah, we weren't able to scale the game with competitors entering in the space. This is just a graph here of a timeline of you can look at this later more in detail, but pretty much here, when you start to see the ROAS numbers drop below 100%, that's where we started to see all the other game competitors come in. And then you see this is lifetime and also projected ROAS. So this is 60%, and unfortunately can't make a business on that. Yeah, and then more about the clans feature. So we could have focused on the monetization, and I'll highlight this actually in the things to do in the future. It took us roughly about 5 months from concept to actually scaled release, and it really turned out to be the feature that we could have, if we had taken those resources and put them into something else, it would have been, I mean, obviously, in retrospect, you're like, oh yeah, I'm so smart and I know all these things, but it's possible that it definitely didn't help us. I think I can say that for sure. Yeah. I mean, especially if you're working on something for 5 months, you need to see at least some kind of return, and we could have focused on other things that the players actually wanted, and also the monetization, for example, could have been worked on. Yeah, and yeah, I'm being honest here. Like, I think for me, it was a really wake-up call when I started to think about the decision-making at the time, and it's a realization of just how complicated, I guess, the building a mobile game is, a mobile free-to-play game, and how many factors you have to do. Not to mention if you're working as a team lead, and then all the factors of running and building a new company. Those are all. I won't make too many excuses, but there's a lot of things that you have to kind of get right in order to be successful. So yeah, I didn't maybe just in retrospect understand the scale in which we needed to create content. I think that's obvious now. And then also, I think the other point here is I want to make, which won't let me. We didn't have an eye on the finances, so it was something that this is where I'm going into a bit of the company struggles. We didn't have a single person, an owner, who was taking a look at the unit cost of a game. So this is like if you're running a game and you want to generate revenue, how much does it cost? Our team grew quite fast, and then unfortunately the revenue did not. So yeah. And yes, so in the future, I'll try to speed this one up. Respect the goal in cohorts. This is something that I think maybe I underestimated, but then I also felt like we had spent so much time and energy and money into this game that like I just felt, oh, this is gonna continue. But then you start seeing small signs that, like, for example, the ROAS just randomly drops, and you're like, wait, what happened? And then you start to see that, okay, well, actually, there's a pool of users that you do actually see in that perform extremely well, and then that will run dry. So if you're in a high moment, you need to prepare for an eventuality that the game's baseline will be seen. And until you get there, you should not be scaling your game. Like, I think it's just, like, if you don't know the actual baseline, if you're not continually trying to scale the game and you're not pushing the boundaries, the recommendation would be just not scale the team, for example. Those are long-term costs, and they're harder to get rid of. So, yeah. As a cost, not as a person, yeah. I say that so cavalier, like, oh yeah, just get rid of them. I'm glad you guys are laughing. Yeah, you're. Yeah, exactly, right? All right, let's move on. All right. Yeah. So think about what's next for the genre. So I highlighted this. Do not copy Merge Mansion. So I think there's a lot of space in the area, and there's Merge Dragons. If you just look at that game has so many flaws and so many areas which you can just look at that game and then take a variant from it. Like Evermerge did this. I'll actually highlight a few of these, and then given the state of UA, like, you need to find something that like really stands out. You can do that in a variety of ways, whether it's IP or maybe you have a theme or fantasy that's new to the genre or new to the market. But can you communicate that in 5 seconds? Like, can you get that point? Why should a player play this game in 5 seconds? It needs to be that fast. Yeah, and then of course you can do the organics, but that's a whole different beast of trying to find something that is sort of viral. But yeah, so here are some, I guess, since I'm not really working on merge games right now, maybe I don't know, maybe I am. Is one thing is about the tight board space. That is a complaint that I've met, and it obviously has like their reasons, design reasons why they exist, and there are ways, for example, like selling items, which I already said that sucks. Is there a way to make that actually more enjoyable or more fun, or tie it into somehow to the game more, that maybe you get currency every time that you sell it, or just find some way to innovate on that. That alone probably is not going to be enough. But then there's the board and meta space being separate. So in merge games, casual merge, you have the board, and then you have the place where you're building. In Merge Dragons, they're the same. So is there not an area in there that you could have, that there could be actually a merge 2 board or a casual merge board that actually then you're building and repairing things on that board itself? Then the depths of spend. So I think this is really tapping into like the idea of character collection. Are there other metas that could be used? I think there's a whole bunch of opportunities there. I can't exactly remember what I was thinking there, but the last one, and this is something that we dealt with, was the lack of pinch points and lack of high leverage points in merge games, because you can kind of continue unending. Obviously, you have the energy. It's really engaging feature, but there isn't a moment where you really can't do anything, and this, like, having a really high leverage point, like a level base, for example. Could there be a level based merge game? I mean, it already exists in Merge Dragons. Why can't you just take that? That seems like a no-brainer, obvious thing to at least try. Somebody, please. Yeah. Hey, we actually did that, but it failed. But I know why it failed, so this is what you do. You just try something and learn. It's not a trap. Yeah, exactly. 2 last points here. I know we're running out of time. We are way over time, but spreadsheet design. So this is actually more like development focused and just something that I think just working in the industry and like being around a whole bunch of really smart people, I've absorbed, which is spreadsheet design, ASAP. Like, I mean, like literally, if you have any design in your head, put it in a spreadsheet. What it does is it helps to structure the data. You can define what are the variants, for example. It also makes easier the connections between other things, other systems within the game. So let's say you have a sheet with items, and then you have a sheet with buildings. You can also figure out what kind of assets you might need. It really helps to define things really clearly. Spreadsheets are just really fun as well. I don't know if this is a common sentiment here, but I really like spreadsheets, so definitely do that. Yeah, I highlighted all this stuff. Yes. I don't know why I'm pointing. Why did I? I'm getting tired here, obviously. And then, yeah, along with this, if you're working in a prototype, wireframe it. Also, ASAP. Like, it should be a part of your overall design process. You think of, you have some idea for some game, you start thinking, okay, like, what is it going to look like? Like, you're creating an interactive experience. You might think that, oh yeah, this makes sense in my head, and you have an idea of it, but then unless you're actually thinking about the layouts and putting it on paper, it just might not work. And you might find that, oh, actually, the things that I tried in my head, actually, when I think about navigating, they just don't work. So that's what I would recommend. And that's what we do now. As soon as possible, I try to think of both spreadsheets and then also the wireframes of the game. And that's it. Thank you so much.